It's kind of strange to think about now, but let's turn back the clock to late 2021. This was just before the whole world started talking about generative AI, AI that can create brand new stuff like text or images. But even back then, the world was already dealing with some massive ethical questions about this technology. And the amazing part? They actually reached a global consensus right before everything changed. So let's dig into what they all agreed on. So this is really the big question we're tackling today. The answer gives us this incredibly important baseline. It's like an ethical time capsule that helps us make sense of all the crazy debates we're having about AI right now. All right, so let's set the scene. It's late 2021. AI is absolutely not a new thing. It's already a huge force in our economies and our daily lives. But the public conversation and the tech itself was right on the cusp of this giant world-changing shift. And that right there was the problem. You had this incredibly powerful technology that knows no borders, and it was developing at lightning speed. But there was no shared international agreement on the rules of the road. Everyone was starting to realize that something had to be done to make sure it developed in a responsible way. Well, something was done. The international community actually came together under UNESCO, that's the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and they tried to do something incredibly ambitious: create the world's very first global standard on the ethics of AI. And this was the result of all that work. It's called the Recommendation on the Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. Now, this isn't just some report that got published. It represents years of hard work, consultations, and tough negotiations with experts and countries from every single corner of the globe. Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. Look at that date. Even though the final published document came out in 2022, it was officially adopted by 193 countries on November 23, 2021. That is a full year before ChatGPT 3.5 was released to the public. This timing is so important because it firmly anchors this global agreement in that pre-generative AI world. Right from the get-go, the people who wrote this recommendation completely understood this fundamental duality of artificial intelligence. They saw it as this powerful tool that had just as much potential for promise as it did for peril. And this slide just perfectly sums up that tension. On one hand, the document says AI can be of great service to humanity. But on the other hand, it raises fundamental ethical concerns. And they were specific, pointing to things like fairness and transparency to stop AI from locking in biases, creating new kinds of discrimination, or even threatening our basic human rights. This balanced view is pretty much the foundation for the entire framework. So why was this global perspective so important? Well, because AI was already everywhere. It was transforming everything, from the floor of a factory to the fields of modern farming. This wasn't some problem for the future. It was happening right then and there. And we're not just talking about industry. This technology was touching the most personal parts of our lives. It was changing medical research, shaking up how our kids learn, and even influencing how we connect with our own families. The stakes were already incredibly high. Okay, so if you're going to make rules for something, first you have to agree on what that something actually is, right? So a huge part of this global effort was just establishing a shared definition for what AI systems even meant. And here's what they landed on, taken straight from that UNESCO recommendation. They defined an AI system as a technology that can learn and perform tasks we usually think of as cognitive, leading to things like predictions or decisions. It's a broad definition, for sure, but that was on purpose. It was designed to be future-proof and cover a whole range of different technologies. And they didn't just leave it at that broad definition. They drilled down into the specifics. The document actually calls out methods like machine learning, and that includes deep learning and reinforcement learning, plus machine reasoning. This just goes to show they were dealing with the sophisticated, cutting-edge AI of their time, not just some abstract sci-fi concept. So they defined the technology. They outlined this ethical tightrope between promise and peril. So what did they actually want the world to do? The document didn't just point out problems, it laid out a really clear path forward for every country involved. And this is a really crucial point. This was never meant to be some philosophical statement that would just get filed away in a cabinet. It was designed from the ground up to be an actionable blueprint, a practical guide for governments to turn these ethical principles into real-world policies and laws. And the call to action really boiled down to these 3 key steps. First, adopt the recommendation as the North Star for all AI development. Second, apply its provisions. Give those principles of fairness and accountability some actual teeth through new laws. And third, engage everybody, corporations, researchers, the public, to make sure that the future of AI is a shared responsibility, guided by ethics. And that really brings us to the main takeaway. This document, created in a world just moments before the generative AI explosion, is not some dusty old relic. It is the very foundation for the conversations we are having right now. The principles it talks about are at the absolute heart of the biggest, most urgent AI debates of our time. Which leaves us with one last, pretty big thought. We know what 193 countries agreed was ethically essential for AI way back in 2021. The question for all of us today is, how well are we actually living up to those principles with the even more powerful AI we have now?